Hey, Jeremy, how's it going?
Hey, Pete, great to see you. Excited to chat today.
Likewise, I am so pumped. We're going to be talking about top performing insights from the top performing insight guy himself at Insight Partners. So, this is going to be a big treat for our audience here. So, hey, everyone, thank you for joining another session here at MSP's Revenue Excellence Summit. Super pumped to have you. For joining us. For folks who aren't familiar, Jeremey Donovan here, the mad scientist, the mad scientist, professor of modern sales, has been a modern sales pros OG from the get go, um, and is somebody that I've been blessed to meet and become friends with over the last few years as a result of the modern sales pros community, which I think kind of speaks to exactly what the point of MSP kind of is. So a little bit more about Jeremy here in a second, but for folks who may not know me, my name is Pete Kazanjy. I'm one of the founders of Modern Sales Pros, and then also Atrium. For those who don't know, Atrium is a sales performance management solution that uses AI-driven coaching and accountability to achieve the consistent pipeline creation and advancement through better management. Essentially, helping managers be more effective managers through better accountability, coaching, encouragement, all those sort of things that you need to do as an effective manager. Jeremy, can you maybe give folks a little bit of a background on yourself, kind of what you spend your time doing at Insight, and maybe what you the kind of a couple things that you did before that?
Yeah, for sure. Well, also you need no introduction, Pete. But
Ha
yeah,
ha
thank you.
ha.
And people who have seen us together chatting, it is always. We'll see if we deliver on this one, but it's always kind of a fun fest of two extreme sales nerds. Uh,
Nerds.
so the shorter hopefully version of my background, because I think people want to get to the meat of actionable insights and recommendations, is I started out as a semiconductor engineer and have stayed kind of true to my math and computer science roots throughout my life, but shifted over into product, into marketing, and then into sales for the last decade or so on the sales side. And yeah, I just like to geek out on all things RevOps. I was at a company called SalesLoft for 4 years before I joined Insight Partners 2 years ago. And Insight is a big VC. We have about $80 billion plus of assets under management, over 500 portfolio companies, and they're nearly
Wow.
100% in enterprise software. So the delight for me being a data person is like, I always want to be a kid in a candy store, and I was a kid in a candy store at SalesLoft because we had billion plus interactions of what was going on in emails and calls and social touches that I could look at. And then here I've got 500 plus portfolio companies that we can look into their data and see, what's real and what's not. I mean, there's a lot of practices out there, and I think the interesting thing is like, how do you separate regular practice from best practice? Because everything sounds good, but you can't do everything. So where do you focus?
Yeah, or even non-best practice, like what's actually like cargo culting, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
like that could be like super insidious. Yeah, if for on the topic of Jeremy's kind of like data munging at SalesLoft, he and his former colleague Aaliyah Homison wrote a really fantastic book on data-driven sales development management. It's called Leading Sales Development. Kind of does what it says on the tin. It's fantastic. It's not a very costly pickup on Amazon. I mean, we here at Atrium definitely send out like many copies of
Appreciate that.
of the book. But yeah. So actually, on that topic, and so Jeremy, I know that you sit in Pablo. Oh gosh, what's Pablo's last name?
Dominguez, yeah, Pablo
Dominguez.
Dominguez.
So Pablo, another sales nerd. Pablo Dominguez is I don't know what it's called at Insight, but like value creation or like value kind of go to market excellence there. Remind me again, which segment of type of organizations do you primarily spend your time with there at Insight?
Yeah, so we segment three ways: 0 to 10 million ARR, and then I'm in the 10 to 100 million segment, and then we also have 100 million plus.
Wow. Okay. Cool. So I think the cool thing about that is like that 10 to 100 million there is like when you're starting to hit like sales operational and kind of like sales organization scale, right? Because like I don't know, probably have like half a dozen actually probably like a dozen sellers in order to get
Yeah.
to 10, right? Maybe like anywhere from 5 to 10, and then there on out you're going to start seeing like a couple managers, maybe a half dozen managers or what have you, in order to kind of get up there. So like it's like where the machine really has to start becoming a machine, stop being a skateboard and really become like a
Yeah.
go-kart, or really
I,
become like the beginning of a car,
I
right?
do feel that way. I mean, there's different strokes for different folks. Like the 0 to 10 stuff is very founder led selling, and
Yeah.
then how do I transition from being a founder led sale to, as I've discovered, it was just a naive mistake I made originally, which was like, how do you get out of founder led selling as fast as possible into scalable sales?
You have to be
But
careful.
yeah, the being careful part, I learned a new term, which is founder assisted selling, and I've seen a lot of success with basically, founder led means the founder is basically doing everything, and
Yeah.
then now I've seen great examples of founder assisted selling where, in fact, I was just on the phone with one of our portfolio companies. We were talking exactly about this. So the person I was talking to was hired in as a new CRO into a
Mhm.
company that had a founder-led sales motion that got them to that $10 million threshold. And now what that CRO is doing is saying, okay, they're doing large enterprise prospecting, so it's still critical for this well known in that sub
Yeah.
industry
Yeah.
CEO to go
Yeah.
in and open the door, right? So
Open doors.
yeah,
Totally.
that's I think I would say founder assisted means like the CEO opens the door, probably closes the door, like that they're going to be involved, because at the end of the day, right, if you're doing a certainly $1 million plus deal, the
Yeah.
person who's buying from you on the other side, especially if you're a startup, wants to look you in the eye, shake your hand, and know that that risk is being controlled.
Yeah, 100%. So my friend Clara Shih, who's the CEO of AI at Salesforce, she used to be the CEO of Hearsay Social. She gave this talk at a first round capital portfolio kind of like summit, CEO summit, where she talked about how like the CEO is like your best BDR. And she kind of
Yeah,
talked about like that was her responsibility. And I think that's, I mean, $1 million deals is all well and good. Honestly, like if you're north of like 50, probably like maybe north of 100, I think that there's opportunities there, certainly from a executive engagement and alignment as soon as possible, right, to like get wide within the account quickly and kind of match power to power. I think that's actually a really important thing, and it's something that oftentimes like SMB or like mid-market sellers are maybe a little uncomfortable around. And like if instead you kind of like think about it as like the marriage of two houses,
yeah,
right, versus like a very like transactional thing, like you want to get to know the in-laws, right, and like get to know a lot of them. um I wanted to kind of ask you, so kind of one of the first topics to get into here is like, look, there's a lot of things that are kind of like evolving in the landscape, especially in the last like 5 years. There's been like interest rates have gone up, and sorry, have gone down, and then they've gone up again, and then like budgets as a result have gone up, and then they've gone down, right? And I think that like we all have to react to those things. And so that as sellers, that means that things that in the market previously might have been viewed as like a must have or like a should have or whatever it might be, are now viewed as like a nice to have, etc. Jeremy does this really absolutely fantastic survey of the Insight portfolio. I didn't realize 500 companies. That's crazy. Where essentially I don't know if it has like a specific term that you use for it, but it's essentially like a best practices survey where Jeremy does like some kind of like very clever analysis on it in order to find the things that only the top performing organizations are doing that are different from what the other organizations are doing. So it's essentially just like differentiating like maybe some secret sauce, if you
yeah,
will, like the things that people are really kind of cluing in on there. And I think we talked about this maybe last year. I think you maybe give a presentation on this. Maybe it's something we can do in the coming quarter or so. But maybe you can kind of like give folks a little bit of a rehash there, at least, or sorry, refresh
yeah.
as relates to the current kind of survey. And like, you know, are there things that have popped out that are like newly emergent best practices? right?
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I even like the term. The secret sauce is good. It's like I also think of it as Moneyball. It's how do I gain a little bit of an edge, and whether that's in best practices, or I also love to do this with hiring profiles. So
Sure.
pull whatever 1,000 profiles of people in a particular job role and figure out what their biographical backgrounds are. We can, time
Yep.
permitting, we can talk about some of that too. But for this one in particular, what I've done this each year, I've been at Insight the last couple of years, and what I do is I put together a list of 85 go-to-market practices. So a practice could be
So great.
something like, we have targets for net new revenue contribution by source, right? Product led, marketing led, whatever. So that's a practice. And this is all stuff that, if you're on LinkedIn or reading a book or listening to a podcast, they're all practices that sound great. Like the question is whether or
There's
not
80 of them.
there's 85, and yeah, but there's too many of them. So what we did
What are we
is
going to do first?
what do we do first? And that's the key.
Have a CRM. Okay,
Yeah,
check.
which by the way, like we actually do ask that one, and like the faithfulness of data quality in your CRM and whether that moves the needle.
Sure.
It's
Yeah.
that actual practices, you didn't know this because you haven't seen it, but CRM data, activity, contacts, accounts, opportunities is consistently captured and cleaned. So like, does that move the needle or not? It turns out that is one of the things, that particular one is one of the things that that top performing, I should say, companies actually do over index on relative to underperforming. But it didn't have to be. Like there are other things in that category of like technology and data governance that aren't as significantly needle moving as others. So for instance, there is a difference, but not as much of a difference as the question, we have one or more dedicated Salesforce administrators, because people might have fractional, especially smaller companies might have fractional, or they might have outsourced Salesforce admin. So anyway, like you have all these things, and the way we tease out whether or not they're top performing or bottom performing companies is that we actually just ask them a question. I learned this from an organization in a prior life where we had paid like a primary research company to do a study for us, and they used this question: how has your company performed relative to your closest competitor in the last 12 months? And it goes from much worse to much better. And you might say like, people are going to lie. Well, yes, they might lie, but they tend to only lie by one shade of gray. Like if they're probably not going to say much worse, but they're going to say somewhat worse, right?
Yeah.
And like I think they're just going to lie by one shade. So we just look at what the people who report much better to that question is relative to the people who are in like the bottom, much worse, somewhat worse, about the same.
Yeah.
And we did do some work to correlate that with portfolio performance, and it does turn out that the companies in that much better category are pretty much 2x relative to the other group on things like ARR growth and efficiency and so on. So that question, even though
you back tested
the
shade of gray lyingness.
Yes, the shade of, and it is quite effective. So yeah, maybe, I mean, would it be useful if I hit on a few of the like highlights and lowlights?
Please.
All right. So we'll go through different categories, but let's start with go-to-market strategy. And I'll try to tie this to what's going on out there. So the number one thing in go-to-market strategy, which also last year when we did the survey was like number one or number two, is the following. We actively manage partner channel conflict using rules of engagement and systems. So the like deal registration systems. My hypothesis behind this one is that it's less necessarily about like the channel conflict piece and the deal registration systems, and it's more that higher performing companies have developed channel. I think it's more basic, right? Like they've developed channel, and what I think this relates to,
they have decided to diversify outside of just pure direct sale, and then that naturally drags along some semblance of deal registration, even if it's like a totally booty Google form.
Right, whatever it is,
right?
And so like why has it been so important the last couple of years? Well, the why is because I'm sure a lot of your other guests at the event have talked about this. Cold outbound prospecting has become
harder.
really, really hard.
Yep.
If you don't have a 40K plus ASP, given like how hard it is to get people to respond,
Yeah.
given typical win rates and so on, like it's probably not efficient
So this is a new, yeah. So thanks to you guys at Sales Loft for
Yeah,
for
sorry.
victim of your own victim of your own success here. I mean, this is the go to market. This is the case with the go to market in general. Is like, there's like identifying a channel, and then that has alpha in it, which someone is doing for us right now, folks.
Yep.
And then people pile into it, and so and then what ends up happening, of course, is that marginal benefit, right, that competitive advantage, that alpha, if you will, kind of gets wrung out of that as other people pile in. And so in this case, it's like, hey, partner is a less noisy channel because it is more laborious channel, right, than sending a bunch of emails, perhaps,
Yeah.
and also maybe a little more sophisticated, takes some some finesse, or what have you. But now it is like you got to generate pipe. So now people are doing that. So in this case, it's like organizations who have decided, who have gotten religion around some sort of partner go to market. It seems to be correlated with this incremental ARR growth,
Yeah.
probably, versus just like, all right, let's like spin up some more outboxes and like send more email or something.
Exactly. And it takes, I mean, you can't underestimate how long it takes to set up a good channel motion. It's minimum, from what I've seen, 12 to 18 months. And
Totally.
I think a really good thing to bear in mind for people who are starting this out is you identify like you start by identifying a small set of channel partners. And the step one is you are basically handing them deals on a silver platter. They're not going to do like,
they don't want to generate demand. They want to fulfill demand.
And they will, right, they're going to fulfill demand. So you got to prime the pump here by bringing them deals that, look, you could have closed it yourself. So, your CFO is going to tear their hair out or whatever.
Why are we double paying this?
Yeah, 10, 20%, right? Commission onto this channel partner who's basically, in the early stages, not really doing anything for you. It's because you're priming the pump so that down the road, they pay you back, right? Like once they see there's money flowing, then they put dedicated people, then you start to get inbound through them. Again, 12 to 18 month investment of bringing them deals.
This is super funny. Another kind of like modern sales partner, Lean Data, actually, a gentleman named Don Otvos, who's a longtime modern sales pros, OG, kind of like Jeremy, and also a colleague at SalesLoft, is actually in charge of their partner program and literally did this. I mean, Don is an amazing, kind of like very voluble and social gentleman, and also extremely bright, and like former revenue operations. I guess maybe not former, once and always, forever and always, right? He's got the tattoo on the back, behind his ear, just like everybody else, right? But like literally do the same sort of thing where they started out with a certain set of partners, and like it's kind of grown from there, and now those come inbound. But yeah, it takes a hot second for it to develop.
Yeah. Well, like I'll maybe do a highlight and a low light in each case. So here's another thing that's a practice, but is it a best practice? So staying on go to market before we transition over to sales process. So we have identified the types of accounts we should not sell to. And so it turns out that you'd think like that on the surface sounds great. Everyone talks about ICP, and ICP obviously is critical, but it turns out that top performing companies under index on that. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing to do, but they just don't pay as much attention to that. And all these have a cause and effect kind of thing behind them. Maybe it's just because like high performing companies naturally have good brand, get a lot of inbound, whatever. Like you can come up with a lot of reasons, but it's just like in the ocean of things that you can pay attention to, this is one that the data would suggest is less important.
Yeah, I think that maybe the thing that kind of pops to mind with that for me is that account executives are probably going to do a pretty good job of like DQing folks in short order, because they're just like, this is not going anywhere. I'm not going to have a second meeting with this person.
Yeah, and the more seasoned reps for sure, right? As they can kind of tell what's a tire kicker and who's wasting their time. I've never, I haven't sold I feel like I'm a teacher and not a practitioner anymore. So I do think that if I were a seller, I probably would struggle a little bit as is in DQing people. But when you get busy, you just got to DQ the folks who are not serious buyers. And I'm definitely a big fan of understanding that progression between a contact, a coach, and a champion, and like what it takes to develop a champion and how to test those champions. So I think that's kind of a whole other thread of that. But anyway, so that's two on go to market. Let's if you're okay, let's move on to sales process.
Go for it.
So number one thing there that top performing companies focus on relative to underperformers is sellers are mapping stakeholders and influencers on the sale. Again, not a surprise. None of these things are going to be surprises. It's like that relative to other things, but multi-threading is,
so important.
Yeah, is like the thing of the last couple of years.
Early and often.
I read a cool. I always like to source attribute, and I don't think I come up with anything original, but I read or heard a really good thing recently. Could have been on Force Management's Revenue Builders podcast, but somebody was saying like you need at least two champions. One is you need a like an economic champion, if you will, and then the other one is you need a technical champion, which makes total sense to me. So I think like
I could really identify that with Atrium. So I just got to brag really quickly. I closed a $60,000 deal, last month because I was I know, right? I was I've been running a couple ops here and there just to make sure to the point about like founder-led selling or founder assisted. I do a bunch of like door opening here at Atrium, but also like it's important for like the old man to demonstrate that like maybe he's still got it, not just from an esprit de corps standpoint, but also from a standpoint of like kind of like constantly like tasting the batter, if you will, and just like there's nothing better that like if you're instrumenting the assembly line of the go-to-market kind of the machine or like the factory, like there's really like no substitute for like walking the line and even like doing the actual like actions as well. Like, oh man, like someone like no one noticed that this slide is like missing XYZ, right? And I think so with Atrium, because the primary stakeholders in our in our purchase process is going to be the revenue operations leader and then also the sales leader in question. And like what we have observed is like there's no way that like we're going to drive at least like a quick expedient transaction without a concerted recognition within the organization that there is a need for better performance management at the frontline manager level, and that need has been recognized at the CRO VP sales level or the RevOps level. It might be like one of those things like, it's like fourth or whatever, and it's not going to happen, versus an organization usually needs to have some sort of like, oh shoot moment where they're like had some sort of like big bookings miss as a result of insufficient pipeline advancement or something like bad, insufficient close rate, insufficient pipe, what have you, that is attributable back to like insufficient awareness on the frontline manager. And then in that situation where like they have had a rock bottom moment where they're like, man, this is a problem, and like how did like these two managers over here in EMEA miss that, then that becomes a thing. And so like it's kind of, if otherwise it's like pushing a rock uphill. Like if the CRO is like, I mean, that's kind of important, but like, boy howdy, like we just need to like generate more pipe and we actually have more of a problem over here on marketing. It's like, okay, cool. Right. And so that's just something that we have found in the last. And so as a result, what our sellers do is they get in immediately and they find like if the RevOps leader is like, man, oh man, like we have a failed Power BI implementation as relates to sales performance management, and we got to solve this problem. And like he or she is like our Moses, then we have to immediately pivot to the CRO to make sure that they're aligned with that RevOps, or inverse, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't do that, and if you just like single thread with that person or whatever, like you're gonna have a bad time.
Yeah. Well, since you're talking about first line sales management and pipeline building, I'm going to go off track for a second and do
Please.
some. Pete and I talk a lot. He's my sales therapist. I was I was talking to one of the leaders in our portfolio companies recently, and he was like fretting over the fact that the sellers were sort of sitting and waiting for warm ops to come to fly
Forever.
in, right, wherever,
From
inbound
Magic Land, right?
CEO
From the
magic
sky.
land.
Yeah.
And he's trying to figure out, what can I do to get those people more focused on pipe gen? What can I do to get managers more focused on something? What have you seen with your customers to help change that culture of I don't
Well,
is it
yeah.
complacency, or I don't know what it is, but
I don't know. Like, I mean, part of me is like a grumpy old boomer, and and like and so part of it is like, kids these days. But I think the other thing though is like, in like, humans react to incentives in the last like five years or so.
mm,
There's like, there was a lot of budget that was flying around, and so there was budget flying around from a purchasing standpoint. There's budget flying around from a marketing standpoint. And so what that meant was, that meant a lot of inbound, et cetera, et cetera. And so like, if that was the scenario, then like, of course, like, you would just become inured to that, and like, and used to it. Now, one of the things that we've seen, and is a big shift in 2024 around, there's a lot of CROs. I hosted a CRO dinner in New York when I was there a little bit ago, and a lot of CROs and VP of RevOps are now like, hey man, we have to change our culture to a culture of performance versus a culture of like accommodation.
yeah.
um, Obviously, that's pretty hard to do in a very inflationary environment, where like, if you're going to performance manage your account executives or SDRs, they're like, hey man, like, your pipeline hygiene is like not where it needs to be. Like, we're going to schedule some time to like clean this up. It's like, well, forget you, old man. I'm going to go over to this organization that's like trying to hire me for like a higher OTE. That's not really happening anymore. And then also, like, the like, inbound has dried up. And so
Yeah, they
first you
have
got
to
to like,
hustle now.
yeah, first, like, you have to set your intention that like, hey, like, we've had our bottom moment. We're going to change our behavior. We're going to change we're going to change our culture. Okay, cool. As a result, and this is another reason why, like, when we talk about this from a marketing standpoint and also from a selling standpoint, is if there isn't a top-down initiative from the CRO or like the VP of RevOps to say like, hey, we're going to performance manage in a more rigorous fashion, and that does mean coaching, which is like yay, and it does mean encouragement, which is yay, but it also means accountability, which is like
Mhm.
maybe less yay sometimes, but important. And so then you would say great, and then one of the things that we're going to performance manage is pipe gen. Oh, what does that mean? Well, guess what, like, you need to generate this many opportunities per quarter, and that means these precursor metrics right here from a prospecting standpoint. Oh, and by the way, we're going to block it on the calendar. We're going to call it pipe gen Tuesday, which is of course like,
Mhm.
I can't remember if it was MongoDB popularized that, or if it was PTC before that, but like, put it into the operating cadence. But I think the high order bit here is really something of like, hey guys, like, we're here to win. We're not here to sail. We're here to row. And setting that intention and that expectation from the top down is really critical to that. And it's really different than like 2023, and it's dramatically different than like 2022.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think
Much,
that's
much, much
how what
different.
we've seen organizations doing that.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I appreciate it. And it is a shift, right? As humans are creatures of habit, and
Totally.
if you got conditioned on, you know,
Whatever.
someone puts food on the table every day, then you sit down and eat. You're not
Yeah.
gonna hunt. You're not gonna hunt and fish
Yep.
when you don't have to, and then yeah, I think that the situation changes. Well, okay, so we talked going back on sales process, by the way. So we kind of
Yep.
talked about the mapping the stakeholders and influencers. So what's the flip side of that? And this, I got a link. I respond to most LinkedIn messages as long as they're like legit, interesting, and not trying to sell me something. Someone asked
Yeah.
me a question about, and it was a little bit philosophical, but they asked me, do you think that first of all, they were citing some data that said most people don't have very poor adherence to like their qualification and deal inspection methodology, right? Medic, BANT, whatever.
Huh.
And they asked me, they said, do you think it matters? And I said, actually, we did ask this question because I want in my heart of hearts to believe that it really matters. Like better adherence means better outcomes, and I actually do still believe that. So, and I have to qualify.
In spite of this data telling me that it doesn't.
Well, okay. So here's what the data says, and it's two different questions, but they both were like where top performers are under indexed. The first is we rigorously follow a methodology like MEDDIC, BANT, whatever for deal inspection, and then two is our salespeople follow a qualification methodology to ensure only high quality leads convert to opportunities. So in both those cases, like there was under indexing, and it could just be that adherence to those things is so low that it doesn't matter. Like that's a possible explanation. I have to believe that if and when there is adherence, then it does matter. You know, I'm a big devotee of upper mid-market and enterprise using MEDDIC, and you know SMB and lower mid-market using BANT or its infinite variations.
Yep.
And you know in MEDDIC, if you listen to the PTC Blade Logic App Dynamic Snowflake people, right, they harp on, I mean, every letter matters, but they harp especially on champion. Yes. And they harp especially on the decision criteria, like did you implant set landmines, whatever terminology you want to use, did you implant our differentiating capabilities that tie to value inside of their decision criteria? Like those you know being two of the more important things that they inspect on. So I still in my heart of heart believe that there's a strong correlation between adherence and outcomes. I didn't ask that question exactly. It was just like, do you follow? And they're saying that they don't really follow. So that's a big surprise to me.
I think that also that's just like, I mean, this is one of the things that we've seen quite a bit at Atrium as like managers are going to talk about deals, right? And reps are going to focus on deals. And then this has always been the big thing for us because like we've been at this like data-driven sales management game for a hot second now and trying to help frontline managers and the people who care about them, like their leaders and RevOps and so on and so forth, really help them better manage by metric. And I think one of the big things that we've kind of realized is that you know what we like to say is that like for the most part sales managers come from like the word department. They come from sellers, and you know they're really good about like interpersonal interactions, mapping accounts, who has power, who's like who hates who, it's like who's friends with who, all that sort of stuff. And like this has been where you know we have sought to enhance that for those folks, is like help those folks who have who gravitate towards deals and talking about them and inspecting them, is to help them also measure and manage metrically, not on a deal by deal basis, but on like a calculated metrics, you know, standpoint, like, you know, customer facing meeting volume, or like, you know, opportunity inflow, or, you know, or pipeline reaching certain stages, et cetera. Essentially like roll up metrics. And so the reason, and like, you know, that's taken us a hot second. It's like something that like we've been promulgating for a while. You know, I think the large language model AI stuff that turns a lot of the math into words, that is like more and like words like for synthesis and then recommendation, like, hey, this rep has this problem because of these facts right here, do this action. That has really helped with that. But I think the reason why this has been such a journey for us is because folks really gravitate towards those deals. And so in that situation, like if people are just like, you know, inspecting all the time anyway, even if they're not like inspecting rigorously, like they've got eyes on those things. So it's like not surprising to me. Like managers do that like they're falling out of bed. So it's like super surprising to me that that's like not a source of alpha.
That they know where to ask the right questions. I think if again doing it again, and if I had more data, I probably would split by enterprise versus SMB, because I would expect quite obviously, like the more, and I've seen it, the more rigorous the deal inspection, the more successful the enterprise sales organization is.
Yeah, I think that's a really good insight and very instructive to us. Something that we at Atrium have had to kind of like internalized over the last like 12 months or so is that small organizations, and actually I think Jason Lemkin was like tweeting about this the other day or posting on LinkedIn, but like small organizations make purchases like extemporaneously. Like they make purchases that are elective. They're like, oh, that sounds interesting. Yeah, okay, cool. Like maybe we'll do that. Larger organizations, like they instantiate initiatives, and the way that they instantiate initiatives is by looking back at what like looking back at a prior performance, generally a quarter, maybe a couple quarters, and then forming hypotheses about a problem that is, either an improvement area, like, a constraint to remove or a problem or whatever, forming hypotheses around that, and then setting initiatives around remediating those problems. And then those initiatives then become potential opportunities, right? They
Yeah.
could be like, people, process, technology, et cetera, et cetera. And so the thing is that this is where you get kind of like SMB sellers or like lower mid-market sellers who are trying to sell a, elective, they're trying to instantiate an elective transaction in an organization that does not purchase electively, but instead purchases predicated on initiatives. And I think that kind of goes to your point, like in a larger organization, if there is no decision criteria or decision timeline, like literally if there's no metric to
Right.
be addressed, right? Because like in medpic, like metric is like is kind of like the initiative, like, hey, we really need to improve our pipeline reaching,
Yeah.
stage 4, or we're hosed, because that's how we got hosed last quarter. If there is no metric and there is no, there's no metric, and then there's no decision criteria by which to evaluate that, like, what are we doing here? The CFO is going to laugh us out of the room. She's going to say, like, dude, this isn't in anyone's OKRs. Why am I here? Right. And
Yeah.
I think so like, and then of course where you kind of tag that or like catch that ahead of time is like in that inspection where you're like, wait a minute, there's no metric here, or wait a minute, there's no decision criteria. Why is that? Well, there's not really an initiative. Why is this in your pipe?
Right. 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 Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, let me hit on. I'll transition over to post sale, obviously, because the last couple of years, expansion, net retention, NDR, or
Mm,
whatever you want to call it, has been such an important thing. So on CS and support, these two are interrelated. They're both ones that people over-index on. Again, it's obvious, I think, on the over-indexing. So the first one is we have the necessary tools and data to provide effective customer support. So that's like the number one thing in that domain is this data would suggest that support basically trumps success. They're both important, but I think it's like if the lights are not on, you really don't care what's in the room.
yeah.
So that's a keep the lights on thing. And then but related is we have structured processes for the customer support team to provide in this case feedback to the product team about common customer issues and suggested improvements. So like that and I think we see that in a lot of the pieces, and I almost want to focus on the second one more because
Mm-hmm.
I found a lot of organizations, they don't have good mechanisms of communication between sales, marketing, and product. Everyone knows about the sales marketing alignment problem, but that alignment problem exists between product as well. I
Mm-hmm.
feel, especially as organizations get larger, those teams are just so siloed. So it becomes more and more important to build like appropriate linkages from the sales and marketing teams over into the product development team.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's where so depending on where you're at from a volume of support queries standpoint, that can be a really rich treasure trove there. Because I think what ends up happening is oftentimes if you like product roadmap will get delivered against or like directed against kind of like win rate lumps,
Mm.
right? Like, oh man, we lost this deal because of blah, blah, blah. Now, ideally, what you're doing is you're synthesizing that in some sort of capacity. Like, I'll use us as an example. A few years ago, so Atrium only works with Salesforce as kind of like the CRM kind of data provider. We also work with email systems as well that layers in that activity information. So for like Google Apps and then Office 365. A couple of years ago we didn't have Office 365 because at the time like our ICP was 10 to 20 seller organizations, very, very, very heavily focused on Google Apps or whatever. Now that our ICP is like 50 to 500 sellers, well, that's Office 365. And so what would happen is, of course, like you get very grumpy reps who are like, oh man, this organization has like really massive pain in them. They deployed all this to like Tableau, and like none of the managers are consuming it at all, and it's like totally awful. And they really want to work with us, but they use Office 365. And of course, this was like 36 months ago, right?
Yeah.
And so then, of course, like they're gonna yell. They're gonna be like, that I would have won that deal if we had Office 365. Do that, right? But I think there's another piece of this too, which is what are the kind of like the paper cuts that people are continually getting in the product, and that shows up in support queries. So then that has to then be picked up by product management in some sort of capacity, right? To kind of figure out like, okay, where are people having issues, et cetera, et cetera. And then of course like usually the support queries can be very, very helpful there, depending on like what the volume is. Because then like when you have closed loss notes from kind of customer success managers, the same way that you like closed loss notes from your sales reps, are there's a little bit of like a little bit of like historical fiction there, et cetera. So you got to be a little mindful of that.
And I do see organizations operate that way. I mean, specifically, the product teams tend to listen much more to support, and maybe like number 2 success, and then a very distant number 3 is sales, because sales always wants to like, hey, I didn't win this deal because XYZ feature, and it's not that that's not ever true, but it's often not necessarily true.
Yeah. Well, so a couple minutes left here, Jeremy. Any kind of like additional kind of like parting shots, like sources of like advantage that you want to spill the beans on for our audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are the big ones. I was sort of looking through to figure out other key takeaways. Maybe another one is, one of the areas I get more questions on than anything else is on sales compensation, and I see a lot of complex stuff out there. And again, best practice here that top performers focus on is our sales comp plan is simple for reps to understand and easy to administer. So like for people leaders who are designing comp plans, don't get ahead of yourself on complexity. Keep them as like simple and straightforward and transparent as possible. I saw a plan recently with 10 different spiffs, and some of them were overlapping, and it was just when you get to that point, no one knows where to focus. So just keep that stuff simple.
Yeah, I think that like that kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier around like qualification and allowing the reps are going to know what deals matter and what deals don't. I think that was it's really as relates to the thing of like, we don't particularly spend a lot of time on like who not to sell to, like from a marketing organization standpoint. I think you could potentially get yourself in trouble if you make the commission plan like so ornate and complex that they don't know where to spend their time. Then that would hurt. That would really hurt that scenario, right? Because like that, ultimately, that's what's so powerful about sellers. And I was actually emailing with Nick Mehta, the CEO of Gainsight, about this the other day. Like the thing that's powerful about performance compensation is that it motivates incremental effort, right? The joke I always say is like, a bunch of my reps are really into the bachelorette. I don't know, maybe both of them.
I think there's both versions, probably. Yeah.
I don't know, both. They're really into that, and like the joke I always like to say is like, hey, do you watch like when you're watching the Bachelorette, are you like sitting there like having a beer, or are you sitting there having a beer, managing your pipeline? Because the thing is that it's like not actually all that terribly hard to do, like updating close dates and like, oh man, I gotta like get in touch with so and so. It's like kind of, you can do it with like one half of your brain, but it's motivating incremental effort, right? Yeah. And the reason why they do that is because like, hey man, like I want to close this deal and get a $10,000 check or a $5,000 check or what have you. So that's the first thing. The second thing is like it focuses people in on the things that they ought to do. Right, that they ought to do. And so like if you obscure that and make it difficult for them to calculate what they ought to do, you lose that marginal effort, and you lose that like that directiveness.
I always want salespeople to just do the right thing for the customer. And one of the CEOs I worked for a long time, his philosophy was like no spiffs ever. And I liked it. I mean, it was easier for me to manage, but second, and the team to manage, but secondly, like it was the right thing for the customer. Salespeople were never pushing something that wasn't going to be the best option for the customer. So to me, that's a win-win. I mean, I'm sure there are obviously exceptions to every rule, and he was pretty hard and fast on that. He also had a zero discounting rule, which worked. If you have market power, great. Like we had market power, so like those types of rules that just make life incredibly simple for sellers if they know I have this expression I heard a long time ago, which is constraints promote creativity and promote effectiveness. Is I want rules, like as a seller, I want some rules that help govern where I can and can't go, because it'll just keep me focused.
Nice. Well, Jeremy, this is super awesome. Thank you for kind of sharing the tidbits on top performing sources of advantage in the Insight portfolio. We'll have to schedule, a deeper dive in the future where we can actually go through the presentation more meaningfully. I think that our audience would really be stoked on that. Everyone, thank you very much for joining us. I'm not recollecting exactly which session we have after this, but if we do, please stick around and check that out, because I'm sure it's going to be someone awesome. And otherwise, thank you very much for spending time with us here to do some peer education around modern sales topics. So, Jeremy, Professor, thank you for professing. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you soon. Okay.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, Pete.
Okay. Bye.